State of the arts at Memorial Humanities and Social Sciences. Analysis whip smart and professorial smart people talking about what they know best. Listen to Lisa as she brings them all together, and we try to figure out how to live together better with fat stacks of research bound to impress. So let's talk about the faculty of HSS.
Hi everybody, welcome to State of the Arts and our new theme song by none other than Newfoundland treasure, Sean Panting. We love it and we hope you do too. Janet Herron, our producer, has just been singing it day and night. Thank you to everybody at CITL, Mark Shallow, for having us here. We're kicking off our first show in 2019. We have that new theme song, and we're going to be exploring here the humanities and social sciences at Memorial University in Newfoundland. We're going to chat with a variety of faculty members about their work and how issues addressed through their teaching and research are critical to our understanding of a changing world. My name is Lisa Moore, and I'm a writer and visual artist and an associate professor in Memorial's English department. And today I'm very pleased to introduce our guest, my colleague, Jamie Skidmore. Jamie has been working in theater and video production for almost 30 years and is a multiple award-winning designer, director, technician, and educator. And he's designed for theater across the country for RCA Theater, Artistic Fraud of Newfoundland, and many more. He's a full professor in Memorial's English department and also the coordinator of the diploma program in stage and screen technique. And Jamie came to Memorial in 2003 from Vancouver, where he lectured in UBC's theater department. He holds a PhD and MA in drama from the University of Toronto. And thank you, Jamie, for being here. And I got to ask you, so you were at UBC, and you were in that gentle Pacific Ocean, and you could have been all, done out in Lululemon, but you came across the country to the other rough ocean and settled down in Memorial. Why did that happen?
When I was in Vancouver, there was a huge children's festival, the Milk Festival, and I went and I saw a show by Newfoundland director Jill Kiley called Jack 5-0. And it was a bunch of Jack stories, which coincidentally, I'm directing a version of that this year. And I went to see it, and it was brilliant. Anyone who knows Jill Kiley's work from Artistic Fraud of Newfoundland knows that it's really world-class theater. So I went to see that. I was very impressed. I thought, this is the sort of theater I would like to continue to make. And there's a job opening at MUN, and I went to all of the theater sites in St. John's that were online at the time. And I took a look at the work that was being made, but specifically I was looking in the background and sometimes in the foreground to see what the set design was like. And it seemed to me like there was space for another set designer. There's great work being done, but it also seemed like there was enough work going around that I would fit in as well. So I was very excited to move across the country.
Well, I'm really glad you did. So you are a lighting designer, you are a master carpenter, you are a producer, you're a writer of plays. How does all of that inform your work when you're going to small communities?
So I do a lot of work in small communities. I've worked a lot in Isle of Mort on the southwest coast. I've done a lot of work in Labrador with Nunavut. I've worked in southern Labrador as well, and other communities around the province. And it's really essential that when I go in, I become a partner. And I can come in and I can help them learn about theater production and putting on a play. And they can help me learn about their community and their stories. So it becomes a collaboration rather than me just coming in and, which the very first time I put on a show in Newfoundland and Labrador is in a place called Point and War, and they asked me to write a story about the rally, which was a shipwreck. And so I did that. I wrote a ghost story that was an environmental piece that would take us through the community. But I didn't work with the previous director and the previous playwright or the community in developing that. And although the production itself was I would say was a success, I wasn't invited back. And I think that's because I didn't become a community member. I just became a hired hand, and I just came in, I put off this show, and there was no give and take. They didn't own it. They didn't have ownership of it. And that's really important when I go into a community, is it's not my show anymore, it's their show. They help me with all aspects of it, with the research, with workshopping it, and putting it on as well. People from the community are some of the actors in it, as well as professional actors.
So what brings you to these communities in the first place? Are you looking to support rural development? Or rural economic development? Are you inspired by the landscape? How do you get there, and why are you there?
One of the most important parts of my job for me at MUN is giving back to the community and being a part of the greater community. In the case of Isle of Mort, originally it was through MUN's YAFL. So my friend who became my co-founder of the Isle of Mort Theatre Festival, Blanford Billard from Isle of Mort, who was the tourism officer at the time, he approached YAFL and he requested someone to write the Anne Harvey story. It had been done previously in various versions, and he wanted a play that could be done in Isle of Mort, smaller cast that wasn't going to bankrupt them, and so we became partners. And I visited Isle of Mort many times. I interviewed members of the community, of the Heritage Society there, and I went out to Isle of Mort. Was originally a very small island in the Atlantic, and I went out to the island, and I did a lot of research in the archives at MUN. I went online and found ship registries from actual ships that were, the ship that took the survivors to the mainland after the shipwreck that the story is based on. And so I worked really closely with them. We used local people to workshop the story to make sure it was their story. And but nowadays, sometimes I just apply to go in and help as well. So, for example, I came across a grant that would. I've left the Isle of Mort Theatre Festival in really good hands with Lynn Panting last summer, but this year I came across a grant that would help them improve the number of tourists they have coming through the community. I'm also working on which we're going to talk about later, a shadow puppet show, where I've applied for a grant to go into the communities and teach them how to tell their own stories with shadow puppetry, and it'll become another part of their tourism engagement with the general public.
So can you so who is Anne Harvey, just for anybody who doesn't know?
So Anne Harvey was a resident of Isle of Mort. Her father was George Harvey and her brother was Tom. She lived on this small island with her mother and father and brother and her uncle, who was also Tom Harvey. Just a tiny little island in the Atlantic, like I say. I've been out there on a boat a couple of times. Really difficult place to get to. She's just a young girl, like a young teenager. She also had a dog, a big Newfoundland dog named Harriman, and there was a ship coming over from the UK, the Dispatch, which shipwrecked on these rocks called Wreck Rock, of all names, of course. I assume they got that name from having shipwrecks. And this was in Burnt Islands, which is, by car is not far down the coast, but by boat is unimaginably far. And when I went in, a fairly, yacht-sized boat. Like, it wasn't a yacht, but it was like that size. People could sleep in it overnight and live in it and stuff. And she rode in the fog down the coast through incredibly difficult passageways, and with her dog and with her brother and her father in the rowboat as well. And she, together, they rescued 120 people from this shipwreck. And it was stranded. Wreck Rock is not like a little wade in from the rock to shore. They had to, send out ropes in the bosun's seat and be transporting people back and forth from the ship.
And this was when?
I've never been super great at dates. I'm going to say 1626,
wow.
But that could be
okay.
It could be 1826. I would need to double check.
Let's talk about the puppets. I mean, that scene, of course, seems cinematic to me. But you were making something on the landscape, and so it's got to be big, I guess.
So the first play I wrote about Anne Harvey was Song of the Mermaid, and but then I created another play called A Fish Tale, which is sort of a Doctor Whovian time traveling play. I think we're seeing one of the big puppets here behind us here. That's our cod bone. Or soundbone puppet, and there's a little seahorse that went by, and then we just start to see the Despatch here, and basically the Despatch I did as a big ship, put lots and lots of lights on the sails and all over it, so it would really glow. And then her rowboat, we didn't use any figures, we just had the ship come out, we had the rowboat come out, and then we had a strand of red lights moving between one from the ship to the dory to signify that it was the survivors being saved on the Despatch. That play, A Fish Tale, which we did in Isle of Mort, we almost all of it is just told through images, and it's important moments in the Newfoundland fishery. So when we see the giant cod bone, that's what we see before that. We see a school of cod coming out, swimming around. One of them is caught, it's gutted, illuminated sound bone is pulled out of it, but then the giant sound bone comes out, and it represents the moratorium, the death of the fishery.
So how big are these puppets?
Some of them are really big. So like the sound bone is about 12 feet long. At points it's taller than I am, and I'm 5'10".
So people are holding parts of it up over their heads?
Yeah.
Or how does that work?
So the sound bone takes 3 people. I fashioned it after like the dragon and lion puppets you see in like Chinese New Year parades and things like that. Glooskap, who we see behind us, the audience sees, was actually designed by a former student of mine, Nathan Day. He is Mi'kmaq, and Glooskap, of course, is a Mi'kmaq god. So I wanted a Mi'kmaq artist to design him. I think he's one of our favorite puppets. He's maybe 10 feet tall. He has, a huge arm span. He's operated usually by 2 puppeteers, one holding the body, controlling one of the arms, and then a second puppeteer controlling the other arm. And he fights a giant frog puppet.
So Jamie, some of these some of these puppets are, well, they are poems too, but some of these puppets are lanterns.
Yes, they're all lanterns, yeah.
Okay, and some of your poems are shadow puppets. Puppets are shadow puppets.
So yes, that's right. So that's the new project I'm working on, which I'm also working largely with communities in the Southwest Coast, but I'm expanding beyond Isle of Mort. I'm still working with Isle of Mort. I'm also working with Port aux Basques in the Codroy Valley, and I'm hoping to spread out to Burn Islands and Rose Blanche as well. And so my last season at the Isle of Mort Theatre Festival, I helped install Ghost Walk. We call it Tour de Mort. And it's a young local storyteller named Dylan Farrell, who's in his second year at Grenfell. And he had previously regaled us with ghost stories the summer before. And I was like, Dylan, you're a really good storyteller. You guys have good stories. We have to turn this into a ghost walk. So he was totally game into it. He does a great job. And so last summer, he's doing his walk, and I was like, I want to, Aaron Goulding, who runs the Makerspace at QE2, had approached me. I'd done some projects with him. He wanted me to do something with 3D printing with my class, but I'm on sabbatical, so I was like, I can't really do any 3D printing this year. Sorry, I can't really do a class this year because I'm not teaching. But here's an idea. Why don't we see what we can do with 3D printing and shadow puppets? Because so it's like we can experiment with different types of filament, so different types of plastic. We can experiment with how the density that we're using, how thick the puppets are going to be. We can scale them. We can see how light we can make them, how strong they'll be. We can experiment with colored filaments, clear filaments. We can paint them and see how much light we can look at how translucent they are. And so he was like, yeah, right on, let's do that. And I'll eventually do a workshop as well. We're seeing one of them being drawn here on the screen. The illustrator I hired is Mike Feehan, who's well known in Newfoundland for drawing for DC Comics. He drew Snagglepuss. And so the story Dylan gave me, though, about the Brass Button Man is from Burnt Islands, so the next community over from Isle of
Yes,
Morte.
tell us, a little bit about this guy, because he's totally scary.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that, shadows are perfect for being frightened.
Well, that's why I put 2 and 2 together, is because there's a shadow play, and Dylan had all these great ghost stories, and so the Brass Button Man, he we've adapted it somewhat, but the basic tale is that if you're out on the straits in Burnt Islands at night, and it's foggy, the Brass Button Man will silently row up behind you. He'll tap you on the back, and he'll ask for brass buttons. And if you have some brass buttons and you give him brass buttons, you're good. You're fine. You get to go home to your family. Well, if you're wearing Levi's, you do.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and if you don't, then you're dead. You'll never be seen again. You'll disappear. So we have that gag. It's one of our gags we have planned where one of the shadow puppets will be in their Levi's, and their pants will fall down, and
So, what are some of the difficulties you've had with these puppets? You must have, since you're inventing, you're really inventing, and playing with a 3D printer, I'm sure, was a blast, but you also have to come up with a show. So you must have run into problems. And did you work with engineering students? Yeah,
we're working with engineering students right now in the puppet processing process, and so they're taking the drawings, and we provide them with the drawings, and they're playing around with them. So I'll say, can you make this thicker? Can you scale it to this size? Can we move this here? Can you insert holes here so we can attach the arms and things of that nature? So we run into a few problems with the 3D printing. Things that are 3D printed need structure. So we were creating a manipulation rod over just before Christmas. Aaron and I were actually working on this. I drafted it, given it some loops because it was going to control the jaw, and I wanted a little string to come through it. And the first problem we ran into was there wasn't enough support for this structure, so Aaron had to troubleshoot that, figure out what we needed to do to make it solid and to make it strong. The lantern puppets were a whole other story. Before I decided to do this project, I might have been into the Lantern Festival once years ago and made a box or something. Yeah, a long time ago. I decided to bring lantern puppets to Isle of Morte because they don't exist in outports. I thought it'd be a big attraction. I thought people, from the mainland would be like, why are there these giant glowing puppets in this little town? And it's also, Isle of Morte is right at the ferry, so it's super convenient for people to come to. And but I have no training in making them. And it's a problem I have a lot. I never really learned my lesson. But so I was in the UK. I was teaching in Harlow, and lantern puppets are really big there. And so I ordered a kit on how to make shadow puppets from this lantern puppet company. They sent me this kit, told me how to make a moon, like a crescent moon, which I needed for the play anyway. So I made that up, I didn't paper it at the time, but I made it up. I made it out of willow. I would soak the willow, and then I would shape it, and I would hold it together using twine. Then eventually I used a special type of tissue paper called wet strength tissue paper, which can get wet and still hold its strength. I used that to cover them with, insert a light, and then I would, if they needed to be decorated, I would decorate them. So I would, put colored paper on them or whatever they need, or colored lights inside to create the look. Now, it was really challenging. I made like a Newfoundland dog. I made a huge cat. My daughter always wanted to be in one of my plays, and I would bring her out to Isle Mort. She always wanted to be a cat. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make this cat puppet. And we worked it into the story, and it was really hard to make, but we made it. And these giant fish. I had some other help as well. I did workshops with Halibut First Nation and Halibut Cultural Foundation in Corner Brook, largely because Mi'kmaq largely fish salmon. We largely made salmon puppets there. They're the pink ones that popped up on the screen earlier, and because I think of salmon as being pink. and we also made them in Isle Mort, but in Corner Brook they also made other creatures, and they made cod as well and stuff.
So Jamie, if you're working with Indigenous people, I know there's a real negotiation and a procedure to make sure that any kind of storytelling is respected, and
absolutely.
So how does that work? How do you what kind of procedures do you do to ensure that everybody is happy?
Well, with the fishtail, first of all, I wanted to tell the story of the Newfoundland fishery. And obviously it is part of Canada 150, and obviously that expands far beyond 150 years. Our First Nations people have been here who knows how long, so I wanted to tell that story. So the first thing I did was I approached Halibut. I figured out who I needed to talk to, and I told them my idea, and it was a fellow named Mitch Blanchard, we talked about how we could make it work, what we needed to do. I did some research on possible stories we could tell. I brought it back to Halibut and to Mitch, and I wrote a script, which is a very different script because it's mostly visual. There's very little spoken word in it. We workshopped it in Isle Mort, and then we workshopped it in Corner Brook as well, at the Halibut offices. We had community arts members there. We had elders there. We had other members of the Halibut community, including the chief was there as well. And we workshopped it. We're actually using Indigenous actors for the most part that year, but it's only a coincidence because I was also doing a simultaneous project with Nunatuivut. So they were the three of the actors we were working with were of Southern Inuit heritage from another project. And then I took all the feedback, reworked things, provided again, made sure elders saw it. And then with that project, I made sure that because it's not just me, that we appropriately hired actors of Mi'kmaq heritage. Luckily, Nathan Day, who also made Glue's Cap, is, I think, one of the best actors in the province. He wants to be a chef, but he can do. He's amazing. He can do anything. He made Glue's Cap. He also acted as Blaumu, who is the Mi'kmaq character. Lynn Panting played a futuristic Anne Harvey, a relative of Anne Harvey. There's a lot of people in the Isle Mort area named Anne or Tom or George descendants of the Harvey family, and we also hired Nora Barker, who's another really, really great actor locally, who's also of Mi'kmaq heritage, and she played a number of other roles. She also helped create some of the puppets as well. So everything we did that had anything to do with Mi'kmaq heritage, we passed through Halibut. So same with the costumes. We ended up using very neutral costumes, some silhouettes. We used some feathers that were also illuminated. Everything was illuminated in the show if we could, and we made sure we showed it all was okayed by Halibut.
Well, that's really great to hear that experience, because it helps me think about how I'm going to work with Indigenous people. Yeah. If I should be so lucky. What do you get out of working in those communities, and what do the communities get from you, or from the experience, I guess?
I get a lot of friends.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone knows me in Alamort, but I'd say everyone recognizes me, and I'm treated like I'm like the best guest you could imagine. Like seriously, like they're just so welcoming. They're glad I'm there, and I work with them, but as anyone who does research knows, I think I was quoted saying this once upon a time by maybe even Janet Herron, who's producing this show, that you get as good as you give. It's always reciprocated. I'm always learning. I'm always getting opportunities. I'm always being challenged. Like when I wrote Song of the Mermaid and I took it to the workshop, I thought it was a pretty cool story. And we were workshopping, and I brought in, I think, 3 professional actors, and then we were using at least 5 actors from the Alamort area. And, most of them were descendants of George and Anne and Tom. And I was telling it, again, because I was an outsider, I was telling it from an outsider's perspective. So rather than telling it from Anne's perspective, which the story had always been told, I told it from the perspective of the first mate on the Dispatch. And we don't know what happened on that ship on the way over. So I imagined, I took a lot of theatrical liberties. I imagined a love triangle on the ship between the captain, a male passenger from Ireland, and a female passenger who was recently widowed. And one of the things we did know was that for some reason the captain left the ship after it had been shipwrecked. Well, all the other passengers were on it. Got into this, I can't remember the name of it, but the smaller boat, and was hit by a wave that flung the boat up over the ship and smashed into the ship, and he was killed. So one of the women from the Alamort area was like, how does that factor into this love story? Like, why does the captain abandon his ship? He's supposed to be the last person to go down with the ship. And so we worked that into the love story, where that's where he was rejected. And so that was why he got in the ship, was because he loved this woman and she rejected him and chose what he considered a lesser man. And so he knew he was going to his death. And that's why that happened in this story. We'll never know why it really happened. It's confusing, but, or I guess maybe not all captains believe they need to die with their ship. But, certainly, it was, and if she hadn't been involved as a community member, that would have never really been explained, and we wouldn't have had as and in fact, I think a lot of the love story came from that comment. We wouldn't have never had that aspect of the drama.
Well, from some of the photographs I've seen, from your work, children are running around and people are there, and it's very energetic, and bodies are used to hold up these beautiful sea creatures and mythical characters. And it's a spectacle, and it has to happen in that landscape, it seems. The story is from the landscape, but also it seems like these, magical creatures that you've created belong there.
I should say that Lynn Panting, who is Sean Panting's niece, who did your
fantastic song.
Your new song. So Lynn took over the festival last summer. She started working with me the summer before. I was so excited when she came out to audition, because Lynn, of course, is besides being a wonderful actor, is also a choreographer. And I really, I was looking for a choreographer for this show, so I was extremely pleased. And one of the goals that we really became co-creators of it. Like, I was responsible for the puppets and the music and certain aspects of, the mise en scène, all the things that fill up the stage space. And, she took over other aspects, the movement, the choreography, trying to tell the story with the puppets and things of that nature. So she's really wonderful. And she came in immediately and found a choreographic pattern that we could follow on stage that was, I don't think you would really notice it, but was always there, so we could slip in and out of it very, very easily. And one of the goals I gave her was I wanted to be able to bring community members in half an hour before the show and integrate them into it. She brought community members in 10 minutes before the show, and we were able to integrate them. So we always take a couple of professional actors. We also always hire actors from the area. But then we're bringing in lots of kids, tweens, teenagers as well to manipulate these puppets. We took the show to Corner Brook, and we did it there. That's actually my daughter carrying, that we see every now and then popping up, carrying the seahorse. That's one of my favorite puppets I made. And we must have had, like, I don't know, 20 kids that night. And the puppets have fairly straightforward movements, and depending on what they are. If they're a seahorse, they move a certain way. If they're a fish, they move a certain way. And the actors would move, or the puppeteers would move a certain way as well. So Lynn could teach recruits seriously in 10 minutes, and then they would be in the show. And our professional puppeteers would be working with them as well. They'd be following off of them and stuff like that. And Monica Walsh was in that first season, and she did the best fish puppetry. Like, hers was just beautiful. So the one that we tried to model everyone else off of.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for making these puppets, and thank you for going out into the dark with, and illuminating it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And I think we're done.
State of the arts
Cheers.
at Memorial Humanities and Social Sciences. Analysis whip smart and professorial smart people talking about what they know best. Listen to Lisa as she brings them all together, and we try to figure out how to live together better with fat stacks of research bound to impress. So let's talk about the faculty of HSS.